All right, Cliff. I know like probably still everybody in basketball world know who you are. But
Yeah,
still, like, can you introduce yourself for a little bit?
absolutely. So my name is Cliff Spiller. I'm the director of strength and conditioning for men's basketball at the University of Oregon. I'm going on year 4 here. I spent some time in the NBA, 7 years to be exact. Was very fortunate to get my start with the 76ers, working under Todd Wright, who's now with the Los Angeles Clippers, and Todor Pandolf, who's now with the Orlando Magic. Spent 4 years there, two as an intern and two as the head G League strength and conditioning coach. From there, I ended up landing an opportunity with the Phoenix Suns, with Daniel Bowl, Brady Howe, Corey Schlesinger at the time. I always tell people I had a cup of coffee in Phoenix because that was the same year COVID kind of came in to shut things down. So when that happened, I ended up returning back home for a year, but during that time, I didn't sit on my hands. I went to massage school, got dual certified LMT, which I currently use here at Oregon when I can. Then from there, that landed me an opportunity with the Utah Jazz, where I spent 2 seasons with them. And then after spending 2 seasons with them, I decided, I wanted to lead my own program, so which, had numerous opportunities, but I just didn't feel right leaving at the time. I feel like, I just wanted to, get a couple years of NBA, actual full-time NBA experience on my belt. But then Oregon came calling. It just felt like it was the right move, right opportunity at the time. A program that's consistently in NCAA tournament, top 15 program. I know last year we were ranked as high as 10 in the country. So I just felt like it was a great opportunity, especially with the, Nike brand and just the culture of winning here. So going on year 4, it's been a great run so far. I'm enjoying it. Big Ten. It's brutal, it is a brutal schedule, but I feel like my NBA and G League, my time in NBA and the G League prepared me for that, with the cross country travel. So I think using that experience and helping our athletes understand the importance of not only hydrating, but proper sleep, even our coaching staff, just to make sure we're able and ready to play and give our best effort each day, each game, night in, night out. I think that my experience in the NBA has helped me just kind of prepare my athletes to, understand those demands and how it can impact performance.
Nice, nice, nice. So, think me, Nate, Jill, we all follow like your Instagram account or like your Facebook account a
Yeah.
lot. And obviously you post a lot of like the Gary Gray stuff and
Mhm.
obviously from Todd, right? So can I kind of share like, uh, what like besides learning under Todd, right? What got you into like putting so much training into the 3D movement stuff?
Well, got to give credit to where credit is due, and just, Todd being very fortunate early in my career to work under him, not only as an amazing coach, but an amazing mentor, and consider him a great friend. So it just kind of set the foundation, and it just made sense, even though I didn't really fully grasp it at the time as I was learning it. It made sense, and the way Todd explained, the way he explains to the athletes and to coaches and front office, and just in seeing him present numerous times, it just made sense. So I just started, decided to make that my foundation, and what essentially what kind of came from it was, you know, when I mentioned this before, just not getting, trying not to get dogmatic in my training, where I believe, when I came down to college, it's still development. And these guys are playing a lot of basketball already, but we still got to create a robust athlete, but also that a robust athlete that can move. So, having that foundation allowed me to be, a light years ahead in a way where the field is going. Because now I'm starting to see a lot more people learning about fascially based training, 3D movement, vector based training, where, Todd was basically the founder in a way, not, I wouldn't say the founder, was the one that incorporated that style of training in strength and conditioning at the collegiate level, which got into the NBA, which kind of gave anybody who's worked under him a great lens and view of performance and where it was going. In a way, he was a trailblazer. But now that I'm being in college and having that foundation, now I'm finding myself reverting back to like some of the learning deeper into some of the time-tested methods. That again, athletes need to get bigger and stronger, but again, still move. So I've been rereading, a lot of books I read during my internship during there, which, Easy Strength by Dan John, Triphasic Training by Cal Dietz. I have super training on my desk at work. I always try to read a page or two a day while I'm there, just sitting there doing nothing, just to go back and just understand that because this stuff works, right? Triphasic training works, Easy Strength works. You know, Super training is like the encyclopedia. Everything's in there. So anything I want to look up or discover again or relearn is in there. So I think for just to answer your question, not to go off that just getting that foundation, it just really shaped how I view training and never, it's how I'm always going to view it going forward. But for me, not allow myself and hopefully young coaches who are watching understand this, that don't just allow yourself to be pigeonholed in one way of thinking. Have your foundation, have your lens, you view training, but essentially get away, get outside your comfort zone, add tools to your toolbox, and create a whole integrated system, whole holistic system that's for the betterment of the athlete, rather than just, hey, this is what we always done or this is what works. Granted, yeah, absolutely. But there's always ways you can refine, always ways you can tweak and make things better.
Nice, nice. The reason I'm like interested into all like this fascia or movement stuff because it's because I feel like um recently a lot of strength coaches right now have to deal with injury more, right?
Mhm.
And I think back in the days you only have to like lift the athlete, squat them, make them bigger, stronger. But nowadays, strength coach have to deal with athletes, have to be a part of the return to play process.
Yes.
So can you kind of share like what are some like common injury you see or you deal with in the past?
No, that's a great question. I think you made a great point. And I think college is a little slow to this. I'm having conversations with a lot of my colleagues, but coming from the NBA, I was really exposed to a collaborative environment early, where like strength coaches were a part of the return to play. Skill coaches were a part of the return to play. Physical therapists were starting to kind of get hired on full time. So I kind of got exposed to that early and understood like, hey, like you can't do this by yourself. Is at the end of the day, you have to work with different practitioners, different backgrounds, and different skill sets to come up with an integrated and formulated plan to get the athlete return to sport. Because at the end of the day, it's all centered around athlete care and athlete management. But the common injuries I've dealt with, NBA and in college is a lot of ankle and foot injuries. So I have my fair share. I dealt with my share of foot and ankle injuries. Um, so especially being at Oregon, it's pushed me to pay attention to how we assess stability and proprioception. I think a lot of those injuries come occur. I was very fortunate when I was with the Utah Jazz. I got exposed to the Delos system that really opened my eyes and seeing, real-time balance, control, and compensation pattern. And it gave me a different perspective on what injury prevention really means. And for anybody who doesn't know what a Delos system is, Delos proprioception is a machine that's manufactured from in Italy and shipped from Italy. Almost every NBA team carries one. There's a few college teams that have it already, but more are growing. And essentially, what it does is trains your single leg balance or proprioception. And the goal is to give your foot. It's a wobble board and it has a sensor on your chest that tracks how much trunk sway you have. And a lot of that the purpose of it is to control your trunk sway. So essentially allowing your foot to get a lot of probation and frequency in the frontal plane and sagittal plane and different angulations. So you gain more strength and stability and proprioception, more control. So and essentially, it gives the athlete feedback and context on how they move and, if they're holding position or compensation pattern, and especially where any vulnerable joints are in the ankle. So it's a great tool. Coach, my second year, we dealt with a lot of ankle sprains, and I do a lot of ankle mobility prep work. Um, but, something was, a little, we were just trying to figure out a different way than coach invested in getting one. Last year, we had probably our best availability rate, um, during my time here. And I think we owe a lot of it to the Delos where, and guys are even say like, hey, like I landed weird. And by me landing weird, like normally if I would have did this without training on the daily, I would have sprained my ankle. Or if you, in some cases, you do sprain your ankle because you can't prevent all injury. Um, it cuts your time out in half essentially. So I'm very fortunate that we had this. But a lot of that is that's a lot of that stuff. Basketball is a game, a lot of acceleration, deceleration, jumping, it's very physical, crowded, you're moving in crowded spaces, trying to grab rebounds, drive by defenders, jump, you sometimes land on somebody's foot, land awkwardly. So a lot of those foot and ankle injuries is what have occurred not only during my time here at Oregon, but essentially my time here in the NBA.
So when I work with Adam is always like everything starts from the foot and ankle.
Yes.
And I'll be like, yeah, you guys probably are the same. Right? So let's say if an athlete come to you, like, uh, I'll say, how much time overall would you spend on like, no matter like, uh, mobilizing the foot and ankle or like assessing the foot and ankle?
I do. In college, one of the constraints I'm learning is time. As you know, and I see you nodding your head. So I go case by case. I try to get everybody on the table as soon as they get in. We do a whole battery of testing, and part of the testing we do is like a movement screen. And I'm trying to think of ways to be more efficient with that. But I go case by case, especially if I hear an athlete who has a previous injury to the foot. I take a look at it. One of the things I look at is like the bottoms of the feet and just look at the callus patterns. How are they loading their feet, right? Are they lowering the lateral border? Are they lowering the medial? Are they lowering, more the heel? It kind of gives you a story of how their foot striking the ground or how they're pushing off. And then essentially I check their big toe mobility because the big toe is the last thing that leaves the ground. And, Gary Gray had a great quote. It's like the trigger that starts everything, right? To the trigger to the gun. So if that big toe isn't be able to get in proper extension or flexion, then the foot mechanics are altered, which leads, to alter mechanics or compensation pattern up the chain. And then the calcaneus is what I check now for those who listening who don't maybe not have a background in well, I'm pretty sure everybody does, but it's the heel bone essentially. Um, I check that to see how that moves. I check active dorsiflexion, plantar flexion. I check the metatarsals just to make sure they're properly moving. Um, and then I just kind of take it through a mobilization pattern I've learned through my time in the NBA working on Todd. But this stuff I also added through my time of taking different courses like ART, through my massage schooling. Um, and a lot of times I spend more, I spend more time um, mobilize the foot game day. Lift essentially I don't really have the time, but if I have get what you need days, or if I have like pregame opportunities or on the road or home, that's when I will spend more time. And a lot, guys I think need it or guys request it. I don't force it on guys, if that makes sense. Like everybody, I do a check their foot and I assess it, but also I let them know why, but also give them stuff they can do on their own, but also incorporate a lot of foot and ankle mobility work in our movement prep already, so that will kind of check off a lot of boxes anyway. Um, but again, case by case, you know, just based on history, what I find in my assessment, you know, a lot of guys will ask me, "Hey, you can move my ankles real quick?" Yeah, and they're like, "Yeah, I got you." So,
Nice, nice. Man, you guys really speak the same language. Like, that's funny. So, I basically asked, I think I asked this question to like you, Todd. So, I think 2 or 3 years ago, there's an NBA had published a research that I think is around 21 that those basketball player their midfoot are stuck. So,
Mhm.
you mentioned that you try to like mobilize them on the game day. How much like mobility do you think you can get throughout the year that you mobilize them on the game day, like 32 or 30 something game? How much like mobility gain you can get after that?
Great question. And I haven't thought about that. If I'm being honest with you, I haven't thought about like measuring that. A lot of it is just to kind of kind of get their foot to neutral, kind of to gain more mobility, get them to, feel like when they're walking, they feel balanced and even. So when they're on the court, they feel balanced and even. I haven't discussed, I've been in talks with a lot of like biomechanics companies that utilize AI. One company in particular, called Valor, which I had a really good talk with their sports performance coach Michael Marcy. But I haven't thought about like how much mobility I want to gain. For me, it's just about feel. Like, how's it feel today? Is it stuck? Is it loose? It's really just how like how Kenny's moving. Okay, if it's a little tight, okay, maybe wiggle it on a little bit, like how Gary Gray would say, or mobilize it. Sometimes I'll, take a little bit deeper dive. Like, okay, is it, what's causing the ankle to be tight? Is it like tightness in the calf or the soleus? Maybe I do some, stripping of the soleus or cal, which is a term from massage school I learned, which is essentially a deep massage. Some, maybe some anti work. Again, maybe look do some soft tissue work there. But as far as like gaining more mobility, just I try to do my best to check, using a goniometer. I know my first year I've done it a lot, and now I'm kind of inspired after you asked me a question, maybe to utilize it again. But I would say I just go off of feel, how I feel, talk to the athlete, ask them how they feel, you know, especially the ones who get it pretty consistently, and just see how, how it feels. Like, I didn't really think about like any ways to measure it.
No, that's good. That's good. I love it. I love it. I love it. So outside of an ankle, another topic I want to talk about today is like fascia, which you also
Mhm.
brought up earlier.
Yeah.
So think in the past 2 to 3 years, there are more and more like online courses that talk about like fascia training, how to train
Mhm.
fascia whatsoever. So can I share your thoughts on like how you view the overall topic of training the fascia?
No, fascia, and again, being very exposed to it early on, reading anatomy trains, I read through that book twice. Um, it's one of those things that once you start studying it, you can't unsee it because it connects everything, muscle, joints, even how forces trans through the body. In basketball, where athletes are constantly loading, cutting, decelerating, fascia plays a massive role in efficiency and durability. I think, it's less of an isolated tissue, more of like the body's performance web, right? It's like think about like I always use an analogy with my athletes when I'm just talking about fascia, and I ask me, hey, you ever eat a piece of fried chicken and like there's a little slimy layer that you can eat, but like you just pull off, you don't know what it is. That's fascia. It comes to everything. And training fascia really isn't. I think what some coaches misconstrue is not about training tricks. It's just about movement variability, right? Because I talked about earlier and not being dogmatic in your training. If you understand Wolff's law, understand Davies' law, and how bone and soft tissue loaded respectively, if you train predominantly in the sagittal plane, you're gonna lay layers of force that go vertically, right? Vertically, um, which is awesome for football linemen because a lot of times they're in a sagittal based position, they got to overcome inertia anyway. But if you're a skill position like wide receiver or DB, or in the case where we're talking about basketball, where the game is played in an upright position, played in you know, various squat and lunges going at different velocities and different planes of motion, then movement variety is key. So you can't just be doing squat, deadlift, and bench. I'm not saying don't take it out your training. I think it's important to develop overall absolute strength, but you got to have a movement variety piece component to it, and you got to load in tissue in multiple directions and appreciating that strength it just isn't vertical. It's, rotational. It's in the frontal plane. It's elastic. It's all connected. So I think strength coaches that, um, who are starting to dive into that topic now just needs to understand, like, not saying what you've done or completely banish all sagittal plane, compound axial loading training. Like, not saying that. I'm saying keep doing that, but add movement variety to it. Um, That's the key to training fashion. That's the key to keeping athletes healthy at the end of the day, especially if you work with basketball athletes.
Nice, nice. I feel like I don't know if I asked that question a lot, but I feel like the way you answered that question is probably like one of the best answers I ever get from like talking about fascia.
No, I appreciate that, man. I love studying that stuff. I was, brought Bill Parisi to campus and Michelle Davenport from Viper. Bill has done an amazing job just learning over the course of the years and diving into fascia. I seen him speak twice. Once at High Performance last year, and then he came and spoke to us, and I seen essentially the same presentation, but I feel like I just pick up new things. And I've been doing a lot of work with the guys from Viper and Institute of Motion. Derek Price, the VP who lives here in Eugene, has became a great friend over the course of the years. I spend a lot of time just bouncing ideas off of him, like, anything I'm working on, just sharing it with him, getting his feedback. And then they provided me with great opportunity of Con Ed to kind of broaden my whole horizon, which taught, one of the things I started diving into outside of the Gary Gray stuff is like odd position strength, dead strength, agile strength, which is different ways to utilize the Viper, but train the fascia in different loading. And I actually had a great call with Michelle last week. And we started talking about in-range isometrics, but in pairing those with like loaded movement training and some of the vertical core training I've done. Um, and it was really astounding. And he referenced Keith Barr, who actually just seen Keith Barr speak at Ramsey Ninem's Hoop Summit. And it just keeps adding on to like what I, just kind of reinforcing what I know or what I've learned, and just, again, going back to what I said earlier, having a holistic approach to your training, especially in the collegiate setting.
Cool. So, uh, if we go back to like fa like the topic we talked about, fascia, uh, what would you like? This is probably a tough one, but would you say that there's certain movement gonna change certain fascia? It's or is it all go together?
Um, I don't, I think it's all about what you're trying to target, right? As far as your training, because I know this, if you ever read anatomy trains, you understand there's like the superficial back line, the deep back line, the superficial front line, the deep front line, the spiral line, the lateral line. I might be missing one. If I am, I might have to look it up later and find out. But there's certain exercises that influence those lateral lines, those fascia lines. So I think you got to touch upon all five of those, right? And like, I'll give you an example. Like if you do a lunge, right? You're doing like a normal, I call it anterior, but it's basically a forward lunge, right? And typically when you're doing that lunge, you're targeting the muscle, the fascial system in your back, right? I mean, 'cause if you just think about the superficial back line or deep back line, it runs from the top of your head all the way down to your erectors, your glutes, to your hamstrings, to your calves, all the way to the fascia under your feet. So usually when we do a lunge, that's target on those posterior, muscles, but fascia in back there. Where if you do a reverse lunge, then you're getting everything anteriorly, like the anterior core, like the superficial superficial and deep front line fascia change system. But then if you do the same, like forward lunge, but you add a rotation, like you lunge and you rotate over your top leg, now you're getting some spiral line action on top of like attacking that deep and superficial back, line. If you do a side bend, you're still getting that superficial and deep back line, but you're also getting that lateral line. Same thing if you go a lateral lunge. You could do a lateral lunge, target that lateral line, but if you reach up, now you're getting it. So there's different ways to load that fascia, right? And it's all about, again, I program it in every way I can. So it checks off a lot of boxes. And for coaches who, you know, maybe confused on that, I would say start with reading by anatomy trains. Then maybe you just scroll through my page, scroll through Todd's page on Instagram, see some, videos. Todd, he hasn't posted in a while, but he has a lot of amazing videos from our time in Philly and he has really in-depth descriptions on what's he's targeting as far as like adaptation and fascial systems. Bill Parisi. So I would say young coaches who, again, who are not watching this recording or maybe listening, I would say start with and reading Anatomy Trains to understand those fascia lines and how they run through the body, but then take a look at, experts like myself, Bill Parisi, Michelle Davenport on Viper, Todd Wright, my guy Vince at Pitt does a great job. Garrett Mendenwall, Tennessee. Those are a lot of guys that come from the, Todd Wright tree that does an amazing job of just, incorporating, factually based training in their programs. But I would say that's my biggest recommendation if you want to understand how to like not only know what you're targeting in training, but how to incorporate it into your current program.
Nice, nice. I love the where this is going. I feel like when we talk about like foot and ankle, you did the Gary Gray stuff, learn from Todd Wright, and obviously you keep learning with from different system, and you also go to like LMT if I'm remembering that correct. Kind of
Yep.
go deep on every topic you want to learn instead of like just being very general. Why is that like your approach to things or topics? Because I feel like young coaches out there, they heard a lot of great coaches talk about being a generalist, and I feel like some some coaches kind of misunderstand like what they're saying, like not
Mhm.
so they kind of like just just like read book once and not read it again, and
Yeah.
like not really diving deep into like the reason why and how. So can I kind of share like why I feel like you kind of go deep into every topic. Why is that like your approach?
I just think that's my natural wiring. If I'm being honest with you, like I always been that way. If I get fixated on it, and this is, I'm thinking back when I'm in like my childhood, high school days, way before I became a strength coach. I just think that's just how I've always been, and I always craved knowledge. I always craved deeper understanding of things, not just surface level information. Because I just feel like I want to know a subject well enough where I can explain it to a 5-year-old, right? Because I feel like you don't really know a topic if you can't teach it to somebody or explain it. And I feel like, me sitting in the chair is not justifying how to show, anybody who's watching this the movement. So if I recommend going to my page and the named other pages, but I just always had a thirst for knowledge, like, and when I think one of the things I go deep into my subject matter in my profession, but I also go into deep in subject matters outside of my profession. And I think that just makes, in a way, it makes me whole, well-rounded, where like, I was a political science major as an undergrad, and I still read political philosophy to this day. Like I'll read The Prince from Nico Machiavelli, The Communist Manifesto from Karl Marx, a lot of Thomas Hobbes work. I read, I started playing, like I started, teaching myself how to play chess. So I bought a bunch of books and started to dive deep into that. You know, for anybody who follows me on, social media understands I love hip hop. So I started reading like I'll read biographies of my favorite artists to learn their background and sometimes the meaning of some of my favorite songs or what influenced them to write them during that time period or what was that process like into making those classic albums I love rather than just listen to a surface level like no like this is like the meaning behind this song. This is who recorded this. So this I always like and I know it's a very general um answer to a specific question, but I think one of the things I try to you know when I meet young coaches at like conferences, like the NBCA or high performance, and we go into these topics of like, fashion, 3D movement, vector-based training, I always try to let them know that hey, be more versatile outside of that. Like, when you're early on, obviously you gotta be, and that's what I think another thing too, when I was early on, I was like spending hours after practice was done going through the Gary Gray courses, reading, different books. So you kind of don't have that balance. Once you find that balance, you have to still, you know, develop interest outside of strength and conditioning because, you're not going to have great days all the time. You're not going to have, um, it's not going to be, you know, rewarding. Sometimes this field is unforgiving. So you got to have a balance outside of this. So I get my balance from like using my time to using my natural wiring to have a deeper understanding of subject matters, but branch out outside of strength and conditioning, anatomy, physiology, energy system development, sports science. I try to like branch out and learn deeply in other subjects that just, again, challenge my athletes to have a conversation about what's going on in our country right now, like, or in understand what's going on in other countries, like, learn about, how certain, policies get in place that could impact us. So that's something, again, and I know I was long-winded with that, but I just think my natural wiring is always to go deep into stuff. I'll read a book about fashion, but I'll read another book about fashion. You know, I knew about the kinetic chain and how the foot interacts with the ground and how it works with the chain, but I was watching the video of a longtime athletic trainer for the Lakers describe it, and it just, it made a lot, it just hearing it a different way just allows me to sink into it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, that's perfect. If you say that to me like 5 years ago, I would be like, what are you talking about? But like after like those years working with like athletes, I get it. I get it. So I want to jump in the next topic.
Absolutely.
Load management is a big thing right now with every sport.
Hmm.
And like both of us work with college basketball. So can you kind of share like how like your thoughts on like overall load management and because I know like college basketball, I think they play like 2 games per week. So uh how do you communicate with the coaches? Like what is the best practice between game and how do you help them prepare for the game?
No, that's a great question. And I want to make this point too, because I got exposed with load management at the NBA level. And I think I had a conversation with somebody about this the other day where I think for the most part, the NBA kind of has a good framework and a understanding of how to utilize it. But I think college kids need it the most, right? Because and think about this, and I'm gonna answer your question. And listeners out there, let's think about this. Like the NBA, when you're there, like you only spend maybe 4 hours in the building, but you're on the road a lot, so you got to account for that, recovery and travel, and properly load manage to maintain to be able to play the season. But I think college kids and college student athletes, especially basketball players, they need it more because you got 3 hour practices and you got study hall and you got to get up for like weights in the morning or whenever they have the schedule, and then you have classes. Then we're in the age of NIL, so some of these kids have other obligations like to shoot commercials or do appearances. So I think college kids need it more, if anything, more than the professional athletes. And I think we're a few years away from, you know, I know a lot of big time programs have, but we got Connexon and we are implementing it this year. So I'm going to speak on my time in the NBA, but in how I plan to use it in college, and essentially, um, how I communicate to the coaches is just basically essentially how hard the guys are practicing. Because I think the biggest thing in college I'm learning is very emotionally driven and very emotionally driven in practice at times, because think about this, you don't play, you said we play twice a week, right? In NBA, you may have 4 or 5 games in a week, right? So you got to think about the next one. Where in college, the games kind of mean a little bit more, right? Because it's a developmental piece. It's a developmental piece first and foremost. Like you're not only developing kids as athletes, but young men, but giving them structure and balance. But um, you don't have, every game means something because a bad loss can derail your opportunity to get to the tournament or good seeding in the conference tournament if you're one of those big one one bid one bid leagues. Um so I think that that factors into that goes back to me saying it's emotionally led, where like sometimes coaches after a bad loss they want to their initial reaction is to run the kids into the ground, and it may not be the best approach to do that. And I actually wrote in my blog For those who don't know, I have a blog. It's called elitebasketballinsights.com. So I speak on, changing the conditioning model. But my essentially my approach with the coaches is just to help them understand, okay, like we should probably look at going hard this day, maybe backing off this day. I try to match the stresses what I do in the weight room to what they're planning to do in the court. And a lot of that comes from my time working with both and understanding the Carter system. And I know me and you were in that book club with Henry Barbera out of Alabama, so we read the Quadra system. But again, just essentially, for 2 8 days out from the game, I feel like that's when we have to hit them hard just to kind of get them to spike that low, kind of overreach a little bit, then dial back. And that's kind of like the high-low model because, every game, essentially game and practice loads are different. So you got to kind of do your best to try to match what you're going to experience in that game. And, one thing talking to a colleague of mine was utilizing second spectrum where, hey, if we're playing a certain team that is leading the country in pace or getting up and down, maybe our practice should try to mirror that so we kind of get those athletes exposed to the up and high speeds and running of our opponent, you know, so we're not gassed or we're not like, oh, what the heck, what just hit us? And these guys are getting up and down. We weren't ready for that. So kind of helping them understand, helping the coaches understand, like, hey, like I'm not trying to change what your practice plans are or what you're trying to do. I'm trying to help you understand like how hard some of the drills are, how hard or if they're not hard. Like in some cases, like just helping the coach understand like when to turn it up and when to pull back and not essentially practice off emotion. But at the same time, going back to that fascia conversation, when I bring that up, I want to reason why I say that is just the variety piece. I think coaches at time get really dogged down by their system, and I think monotony creeps up. And I think I'm having a lot of discussions with some of my colleagues, and we talked about how like sometimes athletes in college peak early, and sometimes they peak, and I don't have the right answer for that. So I don't want anybody thinking like, oh, you got to peak it, It's like, no, like I think we're all trying to figure out when's the best time to peak. And I think we all run it, athletes, we all run into that issue of maybe hitting our stride too early or so again like I don't have it down to a science like anytime you get a new technology, the first year is data collection, as you know, and you're just trying to catch trends but also trying to use it to make informed decisions. um so I've used them both in the NBA to monitor training and practice. It's not always about the data. The value is how you frame it. I think that's what coaches need to understand the science and the art of it. And and I tell these coaches, it can kind of confirm what your eyes see. Like, like, hey, this guy's not practicing hard. Oh, let's look at let's look at acceleration, look at his overall workload. Nah, coach, you're right. He's not working hard enough. So then he has a conversation of what's going on. Are you tired or you got some other stresses going on? Like, again, final class, any issues with your girlfriend, maybe some stuff at home that you don't want to talk about. It just could show positional demands, help guide conditioning, but we can't let the numbers replace coaching. You still got to be able to communicate, to the stakeholders, communicate to the athletes, communicate to the medical staff. And I think anybody who's a sports scientist understand like you, you can't just you got to use the numbers to help educate and inform, but don't just rely so much on the numbers. Like it's just basically to connect what we're doing in the weight room, how it's going to match, what we're doing in practice, how it's going to match the game demands. And tech should support the art of coaching, not replace it.
Nice, nice, nice. All right, so uh kind of the same thing that I remember talking to Adam about like load management in basketball, especially college basketball. Uh I remember he always say like keep if it's in season, try to keep the practice short and intense so they can prepare for the next game, especially during the season. You want the load to be, let's say in a game like you got 2 to 3 days, you want the load to decrease, but you want the intensity to be higher,
Hmm.
if I'm remembering correct, right? So, well, so here's the thing. That's the science part of it, right? So, how do you communicate with the coaching staff about like keeping practice short and intense? Because I feel like in terms of the science part, like probably everybody understand that.
Yeah.
But how do you communicate with coach is a different story.
No, that's a great question. And sometimes what I usually do is I go to coach directly. But also you got to understand your coach and understand, you know, essentially read the room. So what I mean by that is like you got to understand like your coach, his communication style. Is he a guy that you can go in his office and have a conversation with? Is he a guy you may have to talk on the phone with, maybe text him? Hey, maybe there's an assistant he really trusts, and maybe you can give the information to the assistant and he can filter it out and give it to coach. Um, for me, what works best for me is like I use approach of you just letting coach know, but I usually lean on the assistants because he spends a lot of time talking to those guys, and those guys spend a lot of time in the weight room chatting with me. So they kind of serve as that middleman just for me to like, hey, like, this is what, basically like, what my plan is and what, we're going to probably end up doing because is, try to use it to inform how, when should we hit it hard and not, especially, understanding that we have a different unique travel schedule. So really just, letting the coaches know like, hey, like, maybe 2 days out, we should hit these guys hard. Um, And again, I'm just speaking very ambiguous and arbitrary, so take what I'm saying as a grain of salt, but there is some context to it. It depends, like, it depends, like, maybe that's time of the conversation, like, hey, like, what do you think coach has planned today? What do you guys talk about in the meeting? What's the plan? And then just sharing the data, like, hey, this is the recommendation we saw from last week or we accumulated over the month. Um, maybe. I mean, you always gotta try to hit them Sunday with that before they actually plan out the whole week. Where you say, hey, maybe blast the guys these days, maybe dial it back. Um, I mean, I'm really big on just like, hitting that volume and intensity, hitting that volume early. Like you said, keeping that intensity high. It just depends. Like I said, like it's all about the connects on really just it's a tool, right? It's just to help make informed decisions. A lot of times I know from talking to my fellow colleagues, coaches are still going to practice or do what they want to do, disregard the data. There's still coaches that want to use it. So it's just knowing your coaching staff and knowing your coach and style, his communication style, who can you talk, who's a trusted ally on the staff or a trusted, stakeholder that you can have a relationship with and maybe deliver that information so it gets to coach in case you're not able to reach them directly. So it's just knowing your coach, knowing his communication style, knowing your staff, and what they want to know, really. Like a lot of it's like, they may like, hey, we want to do it like this, or like, or no, we're not going to do it like this. It's just knowing your personnel is what I call it. And that's a term I use a lot, knowing your personnel.
Nice, nice. That's perfect. All right. So, uh, you're very familiar with the overall Gary Gray stuff, and I believe that you're also very familiar with sports science and strength and conditioning. What are some topics that, with all these years of experience right now, you want to like learn or you're interested in right now?
That's a great question. And like you said, I'm very versed in fashion, 3D movement, and Gary Gray stuff. You know, I got a good understanding of sports science, but I definitely want to deepen my knowledge of that. But there's two things I've been diving into these past year. Um, and I'm got some blogs I'm working on that are going to come out soon. But one of them is reflexive training and spinal engine. So reflexive training, if anybody's not familiar with that, Franz Bosch has wrote a book called Strength Training and Coordination. Really good book, but it's really tough to read. I read it twice, and just sometimes that stuff goes over my head. But very fortunate during my time at Oregon, I've been really, you know, grateful to learn from Coach Jimmy Radcliffe, who's taken that complex topic of reflex training and made it really simple, where I'm able to implement it into my my program. And essentially it's just, think about like, you know about the Golgi tendons and the muscle spindles and like the Golgi tendon, like the emergency brake. And I think basketball athletes, they stop and start on a dime, they jump and land sometimes on a single leg. And, our reflexes are always in play in sport. And, Golgi tendon organs, essentially like the emergency brake, when, you get that, muscle spindle to go too far, it kind of stops you from potentially doing any harm. So it's just understanding like, the pelvis and the hip and how it's a 3D mover and how to do hip projection and swing legs, push leg. And these are terms I learned from Coach Rad. Just co-contraction of the glute and hamstring and trunk. Um, and again, just coordination patterning, right? And it kind of coincides with some of the stuff I learned from the fascially based training. Just good posture, how you hold yourself, how you express force and power out of those postures, which is something I've learned from Coach Rad. Um, Biggest thing he talks about is how to negotiate the ground and how do you bounce off the ground. And he uses two different examples, like you got a golf ball and you got a tomato. So if you drop one of them, which one's going to bounce? Which one's going to bounce off the ground quicker and higher? So it's been a topic I've delve into for the last year. And like I said, I got a blog post coming about that, like in the works. It's not gonna come out right away. It's in the works. But one topic that's gonna probably come out that I've been writing about it, I've been studying, and I read the book, and I might need to reread it. But the spinal engine, and the spinal engine basically talks about how like we all think, it's been written in the 80s and it's a really good book, but it's really dense, so I need to reread it again. But it talks about like how, the spine influences movement over like our legs and the curvature of the spine and how spine influence locomotion. I think we think that it comes from our legs, but we use a couple examples of, people who didn't have like who essentially didn't have any legs and how they're able to use their spine and pelvis to still influence locomotion, and it talked about animal locomotion and the curvature of the spine and calculations and torque. It's a whole, and I'm not throwing out buzzwords. Like I said, it's a really dense book. That's why I need to reread it again. But biggest takeaway for me is the spine influences movement, more so than probably your legs. So that's something that I've been diving into is how the spine impacts like locomotion. I think we neglect that. And I think um, strength coaches just think about the output sometimes, like the concentric output in, max squat, bench, deadlift numbers, where I think we need to look at the system as a whole. And, I talked early on about fascia, how that's important in 3D and how to have movement variety. But I think training the reflexes is something I've been really diving into, and understanding how the spine impacts locomotion is something I've been diving into. And again, I'm saying it again, look at training from a holistic approach, right? Not just being dogmatic in your system, right? You got to have principles, right? Principles influence your system, but you got to, understand what your principles are and just look at training from a whole, right? Not just one spectrum. You got to try to meet somewhere in the middle, take, a little bit. But those are two topics I've been diving into a lot. And, it's what that it's like that adage, like the more, the less you know, if I'm trying, if I screw it up and forgive me, people probably know what I'm going to say. The more you learn, the more you realize you don't know. And that's kind of where I'm at now with those topics. I'm like, dang, like I don't want to say I'm behind, but it's like, holy smoke, this is a whole nother layer or rabbit hole I want to dive into, you know?
Yeah, those stuff are definitely hard to understand.
Hmm.
Yeah. But I remember talking to Dan Paff and Coach Wood, like the topic of spinal injury theory, that's definitely good stuff.
Yeah. And they came out with an article, Altus, that kind of was very simple. Like it made it really simple. And that kind of, after reading the book, I'm like, okay, I didn't remember. I didn't like, yeah, like you ever read something and you're like, holy crap, like I didn't learn anything. But then when I read the article, like, oh, now it started coming making sense. And last night I was reading a research paper because I'm reading some research to write my blog, write my article. And I'm like reading, I'm like, holy smokes, I'm like, I didn't understand anything in this paper. But that just goes down to like, just learning. Again, my biggest thing, if I don't learn, if I read a complex book or article, I'll read it again, but I'll also go to YouTube and see other people's interpretations of it, or find some other blogs or articles talking about it. And oh, okay, now this is starting to kind of sometimes me need to hear a certain different way. I'm very auditorial, so I like to listen to like podcasts and audiobooks, watch YouTube videos. Even if I'm working on something else, just have it in the background so I can listen to it. That's just how I learn, like through listening.
Nice, nice. All right. Last thing before I let you go.
Absolutely.
I feel like this is probably the best question I'm gonna ask for you today. Like, so with all your experience, with all those places you went to, obviously, like a lot of coaches like would want your job right now. A lot of
Mhm.
young coaches would want that. So, what are some advice that you would give to like the young strength coaches out there?
That's a great question. And the biggest, things, for me, and I want to share this with young coaches is just, you know, learn as much as you can early on, like be a sponge, right? Like have different mentors, right? And maybe that person you don't work with, like maybe that's not the person you're interning under. Maybe that's somebody in the business world, maybe that's somebody in the political world, right? You can learn, different leaders, you know, like just be a sponge, right? You know, learn as much as you can about the strength and conditioning, anatomy, physiology, energy systems, sports science. But like I said earlier, also like learn about other topics that you can have a conversation with a coach or a AD or a general manager, like just things that are going on in the world, right? Or things that outside of just that, like, your silo of performance training, right? Um, Biggest thing I want to harp on the coaches, anybody who's listening, two things I want to just make sure you young coaches understand. Like you got to be professional and you got to be consistent. And professional is basically like low hanging fruit, like being on time, communicate early and often, you know, having some convictions, like understanding, like, stand what you believe on, but understand, like, we don't know everything. And sometimes, taking criticism or learning something differently, just like being open to that. And what I mean by being consistent is like how you present yourself every day to everybody, right? Like, are you the one that's bringing energy, or you one you taking energy? Like, are you the one that's like, when you come in, athletes know what they're going to get out of you every day, or it's like, all right, we don't know what we're going to get from this guy. Like, and that's one of the things, early on in my career, I had to learn, and sometimes I still, have to make those, but you have to like show up the same way every day. Athletes and coaches pick up on that. At the same time, I talked about earlier too, you can't get dogmatic about training. Like systems evolved. Athletes are different. So if you cling to one philosophy, you stop growing. And another thing too, and I don't think young coaches, like I talked about earlier, like I've learned that your value shouldn't just only be in the weight room. Sometimes biggest impact you make in conversations, helping athletes understand the bigger picture, and it goes back to me saying, like, just learn the whole structure of the organization, right? Like, you're part of the cog in the wheel, but understand the sports medicine side. Understand the sports science side. And this is for anybody who's in college or working in a professional setting. Like, understand the business side. Understand what the front office does. Understand what the GMs do. Like, in college, like, understand what the athletic department, the AD does. Like, you know, hit up your AD, see if they want to go grab coffee and learn about their journey, learn about what led them to become where they are now, right? Don't just like get so bogged down in the weight room and that's it. Like, no, like go meet up with AD, go meet up with a deputy AD. Like a couple weeks ago, I took our senior women's administrator out to grab coffee because the biggest thing I learned in my career, and I want to share this, in a lot of coaches think that, and this is usually how it happens, like meeting other strength coaches is what leads to other opportunities, which will early on in your career, right? If you're a GA or intern and you work with a really good coach and you do a good job, that will lead to opportunities. But then if you want to take another level, like to become like a VP or director or even an associate AD if you're in the college level, then you have to like you have to get close to the people who are the decision makers. Like when I was in NBA, that was people, the low level people in the front office. And what I mean by that is like like the scouts or like the director of basketball personnel or like the assistant GM, like getting close to those guys, like, playing pickup basketball because that's what we did, grabbing lunch, just, lifting with those guys, even with the AD, even at college level, like the deputy ADs, like the second in charge, those are the guys, you know what I'm saying? That those are the people who are in a position that will get hired, that can hire you to be in the position that you want. Not, unfortunately, not like the strength coaches, the head strength coaches. Usually those are guys are great for you, help you get your first job. But if you want to level up in an advanced career, then you gotta have, capital with people who are in the decision-making role, which you typically, if you're in the college level, is the ADs or in some cases, I mean, head coaches, but learning those ADs. But if you're at the professional level, and no matter if you're NBA, NFL, MLB, NHL, those people who are at a low level front office, those, establishing a relationship with those people will help you down the line. So, um, the best coaches I know, they know the whole athletic department, they know the medical team, they know ADs, they dabble with the front office, they know how it fits together. And just having that awareness and developing that awareness early not only gets you better at the job, but makes it harder for you to replace. If that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. Perfect. That's perfect. Nice. So basically, that's all the question I have for you today. So for
Yeah.
those who are interested in what we're talking about today, where can they reach out to you or find your blog?
Yeah. So for me, like the best way to contact me or reach out to me is through my Instagram, and it's Cliff Spiller CSCS. And then from there, I have a link in my profile which leads to different podcasts I've been on. So once you post this one, it'll go up on there. But then my blog page is on there. But if you want to go check it out right now, it's all one word, elitebasketballinsights.com. And I'm currently reading some research because I'm going to put out another article hopefully by the end of the week. Um, It'll probably be out by the time you post this episode. And then probably next month, I'm going to do a two-part where I'm going to discuss like the scientific side of, I'm looking into like this next article, just for you to know, it's going to be about the spinal engine and how it can influence basketball performance. And then the next two articles I'm hoping to have done in September. It's going to be a two-part where it's going to be about reflexive training and its impact or how you can use it to influence basketball performance. But one part is going to be, the whole science, understanding the nervous system and understanding reflexes, and then, why they need to be trained. But in the second part is going to be practical, where I'm going to show examples and sample exercise you can add into your warm up, into your main lifts, your accessory blocks, but also how it ties into basketball and how it can enhance your basketball performance. So, but those are Instagram is probably the best way to reach me.
Nice, nice.